the biggest shift that changes everything right now with your investment decisions. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am here today with my good friend and co-host for these Friday editions of the podcast. I'm here with Marshall Johnson.
Hey, hey.
Hey, and this is our opportunity to discuss a weekend reading article with you. This one comes to us from fortunesandfrictions.com, and it is written by a CFA, Reuben Miller, titled More Hemingway, Less Faulkner. I'm not much myself for historical literature. I love to read. I don't really read a lot of older novels, which, I do feel kind of bad about that from time to time because I know there's a wealth of knowledge in there. But this is really what this title is all about. It's understanding Hemingway and Faulkner, the difference between the two, and applying some of the lessons that you might see in their writing to how you make better investment decisions.
Yeah, I thought it was a well-crafted article. He talks about his professor in college. He turned in a paper and he gave it back to him and said, more Hemingway, less Faulkner. And I think some people may recognize the quote, but Ernest Hemingway was real direct.
Somebody not being us.
Yeah. Real direct, real direct and to the point, right? He believed in saying less, in that you could convey, the things that you're not saying through your writing, where Faulkner was the opposite, right? Faulkner once had a 1,200-word sentence.
I mean, I can't even imagine reading that. I'd be like,
Can
wait,
you do that?
I forgot the beginning of the sentence by the time we got to the end of the sentence, right? It kind of goes along with the whole iceberg analogy, right? That you only see the very tip of the iceberg. And I think both of these guys, Hemingway, Faulkner, they both won Nobel Prizes for their work in literature. And so you can say, hey, neither one was right or wrong. However, when it comes to not writing, but investment concepts, I think the professor's advice really holds up. It objectively wins that we need more Hemingway. We need to simplify the ability to make decisions. We probably need this more today than at any other time in history, as the whole investment world has become louder and louder. There's a lot more noise out there today. There's a lot more options out there today. There are a lot more tools out there today.
Opinions.
And it can be much more difficult, and paralysis by analysis can ultimately win out if we don't simplify our decision-making process. This is why we like to leverage a framework when we're working with the families that we're working with, so that they have a system to follow to make decisions on a common sense basis, right? Okay, this is for liquidity. What's the best tool for liquidity? How much do we need? Let's put that there. All right, this is the best tool for income. How much income do we need? That's what we're going to use for that. This is for long-term growth. Okay, what are we going to leverage for that? Find the best tool for this. What's going to be left behind the heirs? Find the best tool for that, right? We're finding the best tool at all times, and we're doing it in a very common sense way. Liquidity, income, flexibility, estate planning, healthcare. We find the best tool for the job, and we need these types of frameworks to help us make decisions. This is not a framework-based decision, but it is a framework to help you make better decisions in a different way than a financial planning framework.
Yeah, it's a way to take that iceberg analogy and say, okay, what parts of this should I focus on and which parts should I skip? This to me is one of those articles that is the epitome of, it's not about learning something new, it's about learning something that's true. Right?
It's not about learning something new. It's about remembering something true.
Dang it, I couldn't remember the quote.
No, I mean, that's my quote. That's my favorite quote. So
this is one of those concepts, right? With that one thing that can help you center a lot of decisions.
And that's the risk-free rate, which the risk-free rate would have been easy to ignore in the past, right? It would have been easy to ignore over the last few years
because it was zero.
The risk-free rate was so low. You go, why am I even going to pay attention to that risk-free rate? I think it's arguable that you still could have made good decisions based on the risk-free rate back then, but now it brings a whole new element to the table. If there's a rate of return that we can get risklessly, why would you accept any rate that's below that? Well, it was 0%. So you didn't have a whole lot of options here over the last several years. But like life, we only want to pursue additional risks if they are accompanied by additional expected rewards. And because the risk-free rate has skyrocketed over the last 12 months, that really brings a whole nother element to our decision-making process. We have to be thinking about opportunity costs, and our opportunity costs have shifted. Our opportunity costs are broadly defined and unique to what each person could otherwise do with the money, right? So if I have the ability to get X, well, I have a decision to make on what I'm going to do if I want to do Y, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to buy a house, well, I can buy this house or I can buy that house. I can buy this car or I can buy that car. There's always an opportunity cost between any decisions you're making. I could invest for my retirement or I could go on this vacation.
Exactly. And, you could apply it to social events too. I got to go to this event, so I can't go to that event. So understanding opportunity costs and saying, okay, the point there though is, if you were looking at it last year or 2 years ago and said, okay, I can spend $1,000 on this fancy television, the return that you would get on that risk-free asset is very, very little. So that trade-off was not even a discussion point. But now, if you can get, say, 3% on that $1,000, now you're starting to go, okay, well, am I going to really enjoy this television, or would I rather have that cash earning something?
Sure. And it's one thing to talk about taking a vacation or saving for retirement. I mean, a lot of those opportunity costs that we're all presented with are very unique. However, when it comes to the risk-free rate as a measure of the opportunity cost of purchasing an investment, whether that's purchasing the safe investment or investing in the market, we're all working on the same playing field, right? We're all trying to make that same decision. And a lot of times we think of what the bank offers as the risk-free rate. The reality is the risk-free rate is not what you're earning in your savings account, right? It's actually what you can earn in a treasury. The risk-free rate is the yield on a U.S. Treasury bill of the same maturity as your investment horizon. Now, typically, you would say, well, maybe I can earn 5% on a 30-year, and I can earn 1% on a 3-month T-bill today. Today, that is a little flatter than it has been in the past.
The yield
it's been
curve.
inverted at times. It's kind of fluctuated, but overall, whether you're looking at a 3-month T-bill or a 10-year treasury, you're looking roughly at a 3% rate that you can get risk-free today. So you can get 3% risk-free. So then you have to start asking yourself some different questions. Should I own the stock or should I own corporate bonds? And along with those accompanying risks that they have, given that instead I could invest with zero risk and guarantee myself 3% per year. Same thing goes when you're asking those other questions you mentioned earlier, Marshall, buying a purse or a T-shirt or a TV or a plane ticket. You could also invest those dollars and guarantee yourself a 3% rate of return. Last year, you didn't have that kind of difficult decision. You couldn't even really make the decision based on it. It was basically, do I want to keep the cash or do I want to buy this thing over here? Because you didn't have this massive difference in between those two numbers. You had a 0.07%, 0.07% is a risk-free rate on $10,000 at $7 a year. You basically had no riskless opportunity costs to purchase any investment. Today, that rate being 3%. At the time that this article was written, which was about a week ago, which it hasn't changed a whole lot, but at the time this was written, it was 3.07%. That's 4,386% higher than the 0.07% we were getting a year ago. Hey, Casey here. Sorry for the interruption. I know you're tuning in to our YouTube channel because you want to maximize your financial efficiency, and I've got something for you. If you want to take this a step further, I encourage you to sign up for my free weekly email series, Weekend Reading for Retirees, a collection of handpicked articles on trending retirement topics, my biggest takeaways sent directly to your inbox every Friday. Don't miss out on this free resource. To receive Weekend Reading for Retirees, just text the keywords WR to 866-482-9559, 866-482-9559, or just visit retirewithpurpose.com.
And you can see how it's all interrelated, right? As that risk-free rate comes up, that means the cost of borrowing increases, right? So that may slow down the housing market. That makes credit card debt more of a burden. It's going to change the economy, right? It's going to change the patterns. One
of the things that I used to bring to a lot of conversations over the last few years with interest rates being so low, with the risk-free rate being that low, was, hey, you're coming in, visiting with us and saying that this person's going to guarantee you 6% a year, 8% a year, 10% a year, right? Well, those were all big red flags then. Yes. So it was easy to make a decision on whether you were going to work with someone or not, or buy this product or not. you could easily recognize when someone is trying to take advantage of you, because if they're guaranteeing you 8% a year and the risk-free rate is 0%, then we know that it's not true. Someone is lying to you. You need to run the other direction. But now the risk-free rates are coming up quite considerably, and that means your opportunity costs have went up. There's 4 simple takeaways here in this article to manage a world of higher risk-free rates. And number 1 is your opportunity costs have gone up.
Yeah, your opportunity costs have definitely gone up, because now you can guarantee yourself a meaningful riskless return, right? There's a better option than those potential purchases.
Which should make it harder to make those decisions.
And demand should come down, right? So consumer spending and demand.
Yeah, and we wonder, well, how do interest rates go up and affect inflation? Well, this is one of the ways that they help us reduce that demand and control that inflation, is by rising those interest rates. We have a more difficult decision to make between keeping the money in the bank and putting it somewhere else.
Number 2, the risk-free rate is the starting point for any risk and reward comparison, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, while it should be harder now to justify some of those consumer purchases, it should be easier to justify prudently investing more at the same time. So it should make that decision to invest just a little bit easier today, when we know we can get something at a risk-free rate of return that's 3% per year. Number 3, your bank is earning more on your money, but not necessarily giving it to you.
Yeah, it's funny how the interest rates go up so quickly on the credit cards, but your savings rate doesn't tick up immediately right along with that risk-free rate.
Yeah,
return.
and with inflation rates most recently being reported over 9%, that should give you even more reason to at least get that money to work. It doesn't need to sit in a yield-free, basically, account when you can get risk-free 3% or more.
Yeah, it makes it worth the effort, right? I think there was a time when people weren't shopping for CDs, or they weren't looking for short-term government bonds. They weren't even going through the motions of trying to get a little bit higher savings rate. But in this environment, it can absolutely benefit you, at least take a chunk out of that 9% inflation problem.
Yeah, and number 4, I think we kind of mentioned this, but I want to elaborate on it. Number 4, riskless and near riskless investments help fight inflation. I alluded to that here just a moment ago. The thing is, you had to take on significant risk or significant terms over the last few years in order to get a decent rate of return. Right. This is one of the reasons we saw such a booming stock market, and we also saw so many portfolio managers and advisors reaching for that yield, going to high yield bonds, going to junk bonds in order to get a rate of return on your fixed income that was similar to what we saw in decades and decades past, that ultimately bled into that 4% withdrawal rule. If they wanted the 4% withdrawal rule to hold up in a 60-40 portfolio, they needed to make sure about half of that portfolio was earning historical fixed income rates of return.
Yeah, I sat down with a lady not too long ago who the advisor had put her in. It was a muni bond portfolio, but it was 25, 30-year, 28, 29-year bonds, because he was reaching for yield, where a couple of years ago he had to try and do that. But it was just, we come back to the appropriateness of investments, but understanding that risk-free rate is helping you make those decisions on those investments.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I think it was, even for us, it was more challenging to move money into safe environments such as treasuries, as we've been discussing, or moving money into investment-grade bonds, moving money into fixed annuities or fixed indexed annuities was more challenging in the past. I think it's a much more difficult decision to make today when we can get such higher rates of return. You should be asking yourself this question: does this still make sense for me to take this type of risk when I can get this type of yield? My dad, back in 2000, he purchased a fixed rate annuity. It was a 10-year fixed annuity that he purchased in 2000. So he held it from 2000 through 2010, and it was guaranteed at 7% per year. What's a historical long-term return of the stock market? 6 to 10%, depending on the rolling average that you're actually using. Well, then it makes it really hard if I can get 7% fixed to put anything in the stock market. I don't know personally. I doubt we're going to get back to that type
that
of
moment.
rate anytime soon, but it could happen. I wouldn't bet on that. I'm just saying, when I know today I can go out and get a 4.5% fixed rate of return for a 5-year holding period, that makes me question whether it's still worth it, right? Especially if people are projecting lower rates of return of the stock markets moving forward. Vanguard put out a number, I think it was around 3%. So if today the average of the stock market, let's say it's 6% per year, if I'm going to earn 6% a year, but I have to go through periods of time when I'm going to be stressed out because the market's down 25% or 45%. And instead of taking that 6%, I could take a 4.5% fixed secured rate of return without taking on any risk. There's not a lot of alpha that I'm getting for taking on that risk. Another 1.5% per year. I think it's going to be unlikely that investors are going to be as likely to take on that risk, maybe as they have over the last decade or so.
Especially as you pointed out, as that rate comes up, there's that trade-off where you go, okay, the conservative investors, retirees, those folks that are in retirement that need that protection are going to go, you know what? I'm just going to move more of my assets safe. So it's going to make stocks less attractive. The higher the risk-free rate of return continues to go, and then you talk about time frame, and you talk about length of investment. How long will interest rates, stay this elevated? It's about being opportunistic, right, and making sure you pay off debts, credit cards, things that lock in those fixed rates when you're talking about savings. But the opposite was true, a couple of years ago with mortgages and whatnot.
Yeah, well, and I want to elaborate because I know that I just said 4.5%. We've been talking about 3%, so I know I can just hear the comments now. You misspoke. You said it was risk-free at 3, but it's actually 4.5. Well, all right. So just real quickly, there are only a few things that are backed by dollar for dollar in reserves, right? Reserve vehicles are what we would consider a safe vehicle. So you have treasuries. So you have government-issued treasuries that are generally considered safe. You have CDs, savings accounts, checking
FDIC.
accounts, money markets that are FDIC insured. And then you have insurance companies offering products that are backed by their reserves. So that would be a fixed annuity, like I mentioned that Dad had, or you can today get about a 4.5% fixed rate annuity for about 5 years. And then there's fixed index annuities, which when in the last few years, you saw cap rates, limiting your returns on these vehicles of 3%, maybe 4%. I even saw some that weren't. You wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole that were more like 2%, right? And now today I can get an 8% cap, or I can get today a 60, 70% participation rate in the stock market returns and lock in my gains every year. If I can get 60 or 70% of the market's returns without any risk and lock in my gains periodically, well, what are you getting in a 60-40 portfolio? You're probably getting about 60% of the market's returns. You're never locking in those gains on an annual basis or ever, unless you're selling, and then you're eliminating your upside opportunity. Today, again, it just should make you question whether you should be allocating as much to high-risk investments when you can generate a return that may not be much different than that, may even be better than that over a shorter time frame of 5 or 10 years. We need to be taking into consideration the riskless rate of return that you can get today in all of your purchasing and investment decisions.